Now, I'm very pleased to welcome a great NFL metrics analyst and very sharp mind in Mr. Eric Eager from Sumer Sports. You can follow Eric on X at Eric Eager underscore. Sorry to say that. Eric, thanks for coming on, my man. I really appreciate it. It was great meeting you at the Circa at the convention in August. How's the football season been treating you?
Things are good, man. It's great to be on with you, and things are good. I can't believe that we're kind of at the halfway mark now, basically. And scoring is down in the league, and some of the primetime games haven't been as fun to watch. But for the most part, this has been an enjoyable football season so far.
Yeah, that's for sure. It's been down, and I didn't think it would go down. I thought the NFL has done enough to keep some offense there, but it's really interesting how teams are just knowing to sit on the ball. It's almost like a race to 2 minutes left in a way. I guess it kind of started with some of the Eagles and what they did, but what are your thoughts on the reason that they do that? Or just they just think they have a better strategy getting down to the last few minutes?
I don't know. I when I look at the numbers as far as like the NFL season and why things aren't scoring as much, success rate is about the same. If you look at rushing and passing, the percentage of plays where the offense gains like positive expected points has basically been the same as last year, a little bit lower. But what's called expected points added is like dropped significantly. And I think that a big deal for that is, just teams are limiting big plays, right? You watched the Raiders the other night against the Lions, and they're just playing so conservatively defensively that they're just kind of daring you to make a mistake. And like to their credit defensively, Jared Goff threw a pick six and they were kind of in the game. And even though their offense wasn't really doing much, they kind of hung around. And there's been a lot of games like that. I do a stream with Rob Pizzola of the Hammer. I come on for a quarter and we talk about football and goof off. And like it's crazy the number of games where one team is really in control of the other and the score doesn't necessarily reflect it. Buffalo versus Tampa Bay, like they outgained Tampa by a country mile. They only win by 6. They don't cover. I think even earlier, like the Eagles against Tampa Bay on that Monday night game where, again, they cover and Tampa doesn't look embarrassing, but that's because they don't turn the ball over much. And I think like a lot of these bad teams right now, and I'm trying to be responsible semantically, but a lot of these teams are like a little bit lower on the totem pole. They're just basically playing conservative football on both sides of the ball, shortening the games. And that's why you're getting some games like Sunday Night Football, like Monday Night Football, where one or both of the offenses look like they're moving the ball okay, but you're not getting the games going over the total because there's just not enough possessions.
Yeah, no one wants to get embarrassed, I guess. That's a good point. They know they're not competing necessarily for a Super Bowl, just kind of run the ball, hold on to the ball, and kind of see what happens at the end. It seems to be the new trend. And yeah, Tampa had no business getting back into that game from a ATS perspective, but they did. I had no side in that, thank goodness. But a couple fourth down penalties, which we've been seeing more and more in the late fourth quarter, in my opinion, and obviously the bounce off the guy into the receiver's hands. I think it was a tight end's hands. Either way, it was just a crazy finish. So interesting that they're doing that. Well, that's a great segue. And I'd like you to first tell the audience, just a little bit about yourself and how you got to Sumer Sports and how you got started. But I'd like to go into some of the EPA or advanced metrics questions after that.
Yeah, so I was a college math professor for 6 years. I was a college football player, but I wasn't anywhere close to being good enough to play in the NFL. And so I went to grad school, got a PhD in math, kind of went the traditional academic route, got a professor job, and kind of during that time period, I started to kind of fall in love with football again. There was opportunities in the space because, as you probably know, there weren't that many people doing really advanced analytical work in football. You had Brian Burke, who I know has been a main character of late with some of his metrics. And, there were a few sharp people like Rufus Peabody and people like that were building metrics. Obviously, sharp bettors behind the scenes are building metrics that no one was, obviously privy to. But then, PFF had this treasure trove of data that I figured somebody was doing, analysis on. And it just wasn't the case, right? There weren't actually people doing the analysis on some of these data sets that I had figured were happening. And so, I went through, I built out a lot of PFF's kind of player eval stuff for, the team level stuff. And then I eventually moved on to kind of consumer side and built out, their fantasy and gambling tools and that kind of thing. And that, that kind of was, my calling card for a while. Struck up some really good relationships with people on teams. And so I was able to see some of the inner workings of, what it was like to be, to be a part of all of this. And, in 2021, I started to get, get some relationships that eventually would lead me to Sumer. And I really enjoy kind of what we're doing here, which is a little bit less of like the data collection and data selling and more of like the analysis, more of building off of kind of the great work that Next Gen Stats and PFF and Fade the Noise and all the great data providers are bringing to us. We're kind of trying to build that next layer on top of it.
No, it makes total sense. And allow me the opportunity to brown nose a little bit. I did happen to find a hat when I was out in Las Vegas, a Sumer Sports hat. So I will wear it for this wonderful show, and it's a great hat. Let's talk about some. Thanks. Let's talk about some of this, some of these metrics there, because I look at Sumer Sports. It's a great site, and there's a lot of listeners that don't know how to kind of compare and contrast EPA with success rate and things like that. Maybe just in a nutshell, I guess, could you tell us the difference between EPA and success rate? What are they both good for, and how do you use them?
Yeah, they use kind of the same deal, which is expected points. And so the way that I kind of think about expected points is it's a way to make continuous what is very discrete. So the classic example is, when you have back in the day, the Tampa Bay Bucks, you had Warrick Dunn would run for 70 yards and get tackled at the 5-yard line, and Mike Allstott would run the ball in from 5 yards out. And, Mike Allstott would get the 6 points, Warrick Dunn would get no touchdowns. And it's like, well, Warrick Dunn did a decent amount of the work. And then the big question is like, well, how much of that work? Because we know, and NFL teams are finding out this year in very, very definitive ways that last 5 yards is actually really hard to get. And so how do you actually make rigorous the value of those? And expected points added is really what'll do it, right? So the expected points added will say, a 5-yard gain on 1st down and 10 from the 20-yard line is worth about 0.1 expected points or something like that. An interception is worth 4.5 expected points to the defense. A sack is worth about 1.85 expected points to defense. So you're kind of putting a value on each of these things. Now, that's great. There are these huge swings, though, right? You think about the Lions and Raiders the other night where Jared Goff throws an interception. It gets returned for a touchdown. That's a big play. That's going to be worth, let's say 7 expected points to the defense because it was returned for a touchdown. And like, that's really spiky, right? And so, EPA is a really good tool for like being able to understand kind of the distributions of outcomes. For example, the 49ers run game for the longest time had like really good EPA per play relative to other run games because they'll hit big plays. Dolphins are the same way now with Mike McDaniel. Success rate is really just like whether or not you get positive EPA on a play. So it's a 0 or 1 metric, right? So it's going to, like, I think of Drew Brees, a very good success rate quarterback, but maybe not a great EPA quarterback. He was a great AP, but better at success rate than EPA, for example. The Niners running game, really good EPA running game, but not a great success rate running game. They're more of like a home run hitter in baseball than they are a singles hitter. And so like being able to kind of look at those two, they're incredibly correlated, right? If you look at the graphs, but like the teams that are maybe a little bit more explosive than they are efficient are going to look higher on the EPA side. The teams that are a little bit more efficient, but less explosive are going to be on kind of the success rate side. And I think NFL defenses have realized that there's not a ton of value actually in optimizing for success rate avoidance. It's more of optimizing for big play avoidance because, the probability is like, let's say you have a 50% chance of being successful on every play. Well, being successful on and 70% chance of being successful every 3 downs, you start multiplying those numbers together, right? And that number goes to zero very quickly. So the defense is like, okay, you have a 70% chance of getting this first down, and then the next first down, and the next first down, but your chance of getting 6 straight first downs is 0.7 to the sixth power, which is actually a pretty small number. Whereas if you get big chunk plays, that's obviously going to lead to points in a much more efficient way. So that's kind of the gamble or the kind of wagering that these defenses are doing in the NFL now.
No, I love it, and that's kind of how I think of it as well. It's like Penn State and college; they're great at success rate, but they have no big plays, and sometimes it really shows. Some of their games are just really low scoring games, and they're only beating up on the bad teams in some cases. But you use that part of the APA perspective, and it's like they're not scoring as much, and it only takes a certain number of plays. You can get 3.5 yards every single play and work your way down, but eventually one's going to be a fumble. So I totally get that. That's where EPA does compared to success rate. And yeah, evaluation. I think of Ezekiel Elliott last year. He's getting all the touchdown runs while Tolly Pollard was getting him down there. Kind of the same correlation with Warwick Dunn and Allstott back in the day. So love it. It's a great way to look at it. So certainly love teams with high both. They can get first downs and make explosive plays, and that's what you look for. But that's a great comparison. Before we get to the games, can you tell us a little bit about ADOT? You guys use ADOT there at Pro Football Focus, where it used to be, they used ADOT a lot, average depth of target, it means. And then you see from Next Gen Stats, intended air yards. I think they're closely correlated as well, but can you tell us the difference between those two stats?
Yeah, so ADOT is really just the distance from the line of scrimmage to where the ball is supposed to land on a pass. So it's really sort of looking at intent. Josh Hermsmeyer, who was formerly a 538, formerly of PFF, one of the best minds in the space. I know he doesn't do it as much publicly anymore. He really fortified that, that metric in a lot of people's minds, where it's basically, how far downfield are you throwing? And the great questions arise in that, where it's like, is it a quarterback stat? Is it a wide receiver stat? Is it a little bit of both? I think that there's really good questions to be had there, and you can really see kind of like what an offense is requiring with a quarterback. Like Jimmy G, when he was on the 49ers, really high yards per pass attempt, not particularly high ADOT. And so you were getting an idea of like, okay, well, who's creating the yards for that team? Well, it's the wide receivers. Cam Newton was a little bit higher of an ADOT guy at certain times of his career, and that's why he had lower completion percentage. And then, from there, you were looking at things like completion percentage over expected, because, Sam Bradford, for example, in 2016 led the NFL in completion percentage, set a record for a season, but averaged 6.5 yards a pass attempt. Well, that's because he was throwing the ball underneath all the time. And so, that variable really helped people kind of adjust what their ideas of accuracy were. Like, anybody can be accurate when you're throwing 5-yard passes all the time. It's really about whether or not you can be accurate at all depths, or at least the depths that matter the most.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. There's a lot of quarterbacks that feed off of that metric, even though it might not mean a lot. If you're not catching them at full speed, running some sort of a post route, if they're all like comeback routes, in routes, and stuff like that, they get tackled right away. So it doesn't matter. If you're great completion percentage, low EPA, who wants that?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, in Football Outsiders, Aaron Schatz, who I admire quite a bit, like they had something called failed completions, which I thought was really cool. So like Nick Foles in 2015, it was like he had like one of the highest failed completion rates, where it's like you throw a pass, but it's like not getting a success. It's not a successful play, right? Down to the success rate bit. And yeah, that's important context, right? We look back at like, Steve Young and Joe Montana and like guys like that who had really high completion percentages, but they backed it up with touchdowns and ball, moving the football incredibly well. But there are other guys who are lower, like Doug Williams, for example, in the 80s. Like he had a completion percentage under 50%, but he had good yards per pass attempt. He had good sack avoidance. And so he actually ran efficient offenses, even though he wasn't necessarily the most accurate quarterback in the world. And that's, why you have to look more contextually at some of these things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's just some great examples on how people use these stats and can kind of read what a team really is. If you're jumping into the spread and trying to figure out what it is and why, and maybe if you can find some value if some of these advanced stats are showing that, the completion percent is high, they catch a lot of balls, but yeah, they're not really making a lot of big plays. And this is the kind of defense who make big plays. They play cover two. They're going to stop you. They're not going to let you through. So there's a lot of great information that you can get from sport sites like Sumer Sports. Well, real quick, what are your favorite stats that you like to use? I see ELO at Sumer Sports. What is that? And what are your favorites?
Yeah, I mean, ELO is just a way to do a power ranking that's kind of quick and dirty. Now we use that as well as some other things to power our season simulation, which is sort of to help, kind of give a blunt estimate of, what futures people might like, or even just an idea of, like, for example, what likelihood are the Cardinals, to sort of win. What likelihood are the Cardinals to, like, earn the first overall pick, stuff like that. And ELO really, like, if you do like kind of a traditional ELO, people will look at that, like, let's look at the R squared with the closing number of a game. It's like 0.75, right? So that, like, a traditional ELO model, like, gets to the real fat of the distribution of point spreads and stuff. So it's a really good tool to sort of simulate seasons, because you can get, on the green there. Now, everybody knows that an R squared of 0.75 is not going to win you money in sports betting. You need, like, a few other things, but at least from, like, a forward facing sort of idea, it can really help, see who's good, and, like, what kind of, like, a win does to a team's power rating. Now, I like to generally think of, I take that number, I kind of adjust it using other things like success rates and injuries and, player models and player values. Like, what is Montez Sweat to the point spread? I mean, I think we saw that all this week. But it's a very good starting point. My other one is EPA per play, both passing, rushing, but also on offense and defense. That's a big one. Success rate in both of those. I also like to, and this is like my favorite page at Sumer Sports, is our offensive line combination deal, where you look at literally offensive line combinations and how they do relative to the other offensive line combinations on a team. I think that that's very instructive and very illustrative of, what an offensive line is doing to help a team win.
Gotcha. So yeah, in EPA per play and offensive line, I always like to start in the trenches myself, and that makes total sense to me. You have EPA per pass, EPA per rush. I'm sharing my screen right now, right from Sumer Sports, and some of the wonderful advanced stats that you have. And I see Eckler rate as well. I believe that's how successful you are in scoring opportunities, right?
Yes, and this was by one of our data scientists who I know you met at Circa, Parker Fleming. It's basically the percentage of drives that get into scoring position. So, series success rate is this idea of, like, how many times do you turn a first down into another first down? And Eckel is sort of like a little bit of a step further than that, which is how often do you get to, like, the other team's 35-yard line, basically. And that's, if a team has a high Eckel rate, but they're not scoring a lot of points, so you think about, like, Dallas or Seattle, like, over time, in theory, you would expect them to, sort of regress.
I love it, because that means that there's a lot of teams that can, and I used to, just as a football fan my whole life, I would see teams they can always get to the 35, but once the defense tightens up, they can't do anything. Kind of similar to what you're saying with, passes on the, obviously before the first down, short passes, simple routes, and while the safeties come in a little bit because they don't have to go back as far to cover, obviously, the deep threat, then your offense completely sputters. So that makes total sense. Well, we have a few minutes to go over a few games, and I think you might be a little proud of me because I'm going to talk about EPA myself, and I'm going to talk about it when it comes to a total, Eric. I'm looking at the Washington Commanders. I want to say football team for some reason. Against the Patriots. And this total came all the way down to 40.5. Now it says slight chance of showers. I don't think it's going to rain. Temperature is going to be in the 50s, which is fine football weather. But you look at the Commanders, they did lose, obviously, their defensive ends. And I don't know. I don't think it's worth a point to necessarily say that from a spread, because especially the very next game, some of the other players can stand up. But maybe it does give Mac Jones a little extra time to throw from the pocket, or whoever's quarterbacking. Yep. And when I'm looking at some of the numbers here, I'm caring about the defense a little bit. Both teams are very desperate on offense. Sam Howell's a little bit turnover prone, but I look at EPA per drop back EPA. The Washington football team is 30th in drop back EPA, and the New England Patriots is 27th. Both secondary, I believe, is terrible in the NFL. And when you're looking at some desperate quarterbacks, capable quarterbacks like Sam Howell, I think that they can get the ball downfield. And I also like the receivers for Washington. And obviously, the Patriots still have a couple good receivers. I know Parker's questionable, but Juju Smith-Schuster's there. I think Tyquan Thornton's finally off IR. You might see a little bit of him this weekend. I can see them moving the ball against these weak defenses. I'm taking the over 40.5. I think the overs are finally starting to adjust a little bit too low, Eric, and I see success on both sides, on both offenses coming into this game.
Yeah, I like that take. I mean, I kind of like Washington ATS. I think that number moved a little bit too much. The thing for me is the reason the Washington Commanders are so low in terms of EPA on offense is not because of what Sam Howell can do throwing or can't do throwing the ball. I think he's perfectly great, perfectly fine when he gets an opportunity to throw. To me, it's more of the dropbacks where he doesn't throw because he gets a sack and that kind of thing. And so I'm more when I look at New England's got the fourth worst. He's got the fourth worst sack rate, right? So
Right.
Howell and Bieniemy did a great job last week. He wasn't sacked until the very, very end of the game. He was terrific because of that. I think that if that continues, and there's really not like a pass rusher, the New England pass rush is sort of more the group than it is like any one dominant player. And I think if Bieniemy can kind of hold strong there with their scheme, I think that the Washington Commanders can score this game. It's an open question to me as to whether or not New England would be able to score in this game, but that's kind of why I like the Washington and maybe Washington team total more than I would actually like, the whole total, even though I do lean that way. I think I like Washington just a little bit more.
Well, geez, they're dogs, and I did grab this at a better number here. I grabbed it twice. I couldn't believe it went up past 3. Then I was at 3.5 for a while. So I like that side too. That was a premium play, but that's okay. I think the side in the over certainly could hit. I think Washington's the better team. I'm actually shocked that they're +3 in this situation, Eric. Is there any games that you like that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I like, when I look at this game, I mean, I think it's a simple, the 9:30 game in the morning, the Germany game. The Chiefs are anywhere from -2 to -1.5. There are some inexpensive -2.5, so you want to do it. Patrick Mahomes, his ATS record has not been great. Basically since the middle of 2020. But one place where he does shine is as a short favorite or an underdog. That's kind of Andy Reid's thing. Optimizes to win the game, doesn't necessarily optimize to win by margin. A week ago, obviously the offense did really poorly. People are looking at the wide receiver group as whether or not they're viable. Chargers defense to me is a similar defense to the Dolphins, who they're playing this week, and Kansas City carved them up. I also think that the Dolphins offensive line and defensive line haven't really faced stout groups the way that they're going to, and when they have, teams like the Eagles and Buffalo, they've gotten killed. And so I like Miami as a franchise. I like the direction that they're going. I think that Mike McDaniel really has this team in a good spot. Tua Tagovailoa is playing great football. But I think in this one, I think you have to go with Kansas City.
Don't disagree. I mean, there's no better fourth quarter quarterback than Patrick Mahomes. And Tua, when he's not getting a big pass rush, he looks really good. And they beat up on small teams and they put up some points. But Kansas City with Jones in there does get to the quarterback, and they can get to the quarterback. And I think they can rattle Tua enough in this situation. I still think the Dolphins do put up points. The Chiefs defense is definitely better than I've remembered. That's for sure. I just think guys like Tyreek Hill are going to want to have a big game, and he probably will have a big game. I wonder if Andy Reid, not Andy Reid, but their defense figures that out and maybe puts a little bit more of a safety closer to him in that situation. But they have a lot of weapons with Miami. The total's at 50.5. And to be honest with you, being in London, I lean under in this total. I think that the defense of the Kansas City is going to show up, and they're coming off that bad loss. I don't think they're going to want to allow too many points like they did to Denver last week. And I'd certainly lean to the Chiefs, and I didn't play it yet, but I might be a player on them later.
Yeah, I think that this could either go like Miami did an opening day where they played the Chargers and the over was such an easy cinch, or the Chiefs have played games where, I mean, even I talked about the Chargers game 2 weeks ago. That total was 47.5 at close. First half of the game, they can't be stopped. And they needed a long punt return and a touchdown at the end just to go over that closing line, not the midweek line for the total.
Right.
It's just an environment where it's tough to go over in the NFL, especially totals that are in the 50s, even with great offenses, just because the name of the game for both of these teams is going to be playing safeties deep and daring the other quarterback to be patient and not get bored on the way to the end zone, because we've seen that with both guys, both Tua and Patrick Mahomes, as good as he is, have gotten, kind of bored and thrown interceptions when the other team's defense is not giving them the intermediate stuff and the deep stuff.
Yeah, very true. It's going to be. I think they're going to use the running backs more than people think as well. I think that they're also afraid, like you said, of the big play. And I thought that Miami, even though they're a top rush defense, I'm sorry, no, they're not a top rush defense. They're a top rushing offense. I think they're going to try to move the ball rushing, but I also didn't like Miami's defense against the run. And I'm looking for the numbers now, and I thought I saw Miami is one of the worst, not necessarily the worst, but a poor rushing defense, unless that's changed. Yep. It's where I think Pacheco props might be good in this situation, Eric. I think Pacheco is going to have a massive game, and everyone's thinking pass shootout here. Miami is 29th in rush EPA on defense, so this says under to me. And this also says running back props. So we'll be looking at that, man. That's a great take. We only have a minute left. So is there any other games you want to throw out there? Or?
Yeah, I think when I look at Sunday Night Football, I think that the gap between Dallas and Philadelphia is not as big as the spread would suggest. Dallas has figured some things out, namely throwing the ball to CeeDee Lamb. I think Pollard has been one of the least efficient backs in football, but some of that I think is noisy. Some of that I think is, Dallas's offensive line going through some injury stuff. Dallas's defense, Jalen Hurts quietly went into last week leading the NFL in interceptions. And, Dallas's defense is obviously one that can take the ball away and score with it. The Philadelphia is kind of a difficult truck to get in front of. If you took +6 or +7 with Washington last week, you were lucky if you got 7 and you pushed. But if you had +6, you had a Washington team that kind of controlled that game all game and didn't cover. So the Eagles certainly are a bus that's difficult to get in front of. But I think divisional game, I think Jalen Hurts looks a little bit unright to me at times, just physically. I think he's performing okay. So I'm going to take Dallas in this one. I just like Dallas as an underdog in this game.
Yeah, the Eagles, little fat and happy. I think Hurts is a little banged up. Great points. He's quietly leading the league in interceptions. The tush push thing, I think teams are eventually going to figure out. I bet you McCarthy's got them practicing that this week on defense. I would think so anyway. I was looking at this, and my numbers say closer to pick as well. And I think Dallas has those big explosive games that sometimes pad their stats, and then they have some chokers against the Niners. But they're going to get up for this game, and it's a big division game, and I can see them being in this game too. So my numbers don't agree with it. I was a little scared of it, but I'm going to consider it certainly, since you like it as well. So interesting stuff, man. That you got 3. I wonder if it gets to 3.5. I don't think it does. I think it's the 3 is probably the best you're going to get in this situation here on our Betfred odds screen. So loving it, man. Big play and probably the biggest game of the weekend. Well, that's some great stuff, Eric. I really appreciate you coming on the show and breaking down some of this great information over at Sumer Sports. Love some of the advanced metrics you guys talk about. Where could our listeners get your great information and media?
Yep, at Sumer Sports on Twitter is our Sumer Sports Twitter account, and then sumersports.com is where you find all of our content. I write a weekly column. We have a newsletter. So if you go to the Zone on Sumer Sports, we'll sign you up for the newsletter. That's a newsletter to preview the weekend and a newsletter to review the weekend every single week. We have a really cool podcast called Stats and Schemes with Tej Seth, who I know you met at Circa, as well as Sean Syed, who has a very good analytical mind as far as scheme is concerned. A lot of cool stuff coming out of Sumer Sports. So give us a shot. Make sure you guys give Sumer Sports a shot. Eric, thank you so much. We'll be talking, and you have a wonderful weekend. Best of luck on your plays. Hey, thanks for having me on. Take care.